Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring interesting and timely information to you, supporters of refugees. Whether you are a volunteer, a community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session, a discussion with Sylvia Nyamuhungu, Reflections on Black African Refugee Experience. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsors, practitioners at resettlement agencies, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Let's go to the housekeeping slide. As a reminder for everyone joining the call today, there's a control panel in your upper right-hand corner that will allow you to submit questions through the questions box. Please use the questions box, not the chat, for questions for our presenter. There will be ample time at the end of the webinar for Q&A and discussion. Everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please raise your hand through the control panel or submit a question in the questions box so we can assist you. Additionally, the presentation, any resources, and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenter for today. Our presenter is Sylvia Nyamuhungu. Sylvia is a refugee organizer based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I will let her go ahead and take it from here and sort of introduce herself a little bit more and tell you all a little bit more information. So thank you so much, Sylvia, for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek, for having me and the Refugee Welcome Collective for organizing this lunch. It's an honor for me to be here. I do not take it for granted to have this space to be able to share my voice and my experience, my perspectives of the Black migrant experience, the African migrant experience. Like Derek has shared, I work as a refugee community organizer for an organization called Church World Service, based here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Locally in Grand Rapids, I'm affiliated with another organization called Bethany Christian Services. In my background, I have a degree in international development and a minor in business. I'm also a former refugee from Rwanda who has been living in the US for the past 10 years. An American citizen now who speaks 3 different languages fluently, and on a good day, sometimes I will say 4. I love spending time with my family and loved ones when I'm not working. I love when I'm not working, spending time with my family. When I'm working, I enjoy doing my work as an organizer. It's something I'm very grateful for. And today, I love that we're having this discussion of centering African Black migrant experiences. But I always encourage everyone to just have this kind of conversation throughout the year, try to make friends with people from this background, colleagues. Just not something to be had on just Black History Month. But I am super grateful for the intentional behind this month, especially in this lunch and learn. I want to share a little bit about the Black migrant experience from what I've learned through my work, and also just share a little bit about my own experience through local organizing, as well as my own lived experience. So although the narrative around immigration usually focuses on the Latinx people crossing the southern border from countries such as Mexico, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras, which these are facts, there's also Black migrants coming from these countries. They're also coming from the Caribbean, from Africa, and they're comprising of a significant growing amount, a big part of the story of the migration in the United States. Today, approximately 50% of all Black migrants come from the Caribbean region, and then nearly 45% from the African continent, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, and 4% from South America. I see Derek, oh, okay. That's intentional that your screen is showing. Okay. uh, so, Black people are a growing segment of the immigration population in the United States. And according to the Census Bureau's of American Community Survey, like in the 1980s, there were about 816,000 Black migrants. And then by 2000, the number of Black migrants in the country had risen to 2.4 million. And then 6 years later, that number increased to 4.2. So there's a rapid growth, and according to the census, in 2060, like 16.5% of Black people in the United States will be Black migrants. So this is a significant group of people that are coming to this country. And then in Michigan in particular, I would say from the past couple years, the numbers of refugees being resettled have been increasing, and majority of the people that are coming from an African country is from Congo. So a lot of refugees from Congo have been resettled for the past couple of years, and we're seeing the number increasing. And also just with the situation there, it's going to be increasing for a while. So for me, when you before being resettled, for me, I was living in Kenya, and my identity was, I'm a Rwandan, but also a refugee in Kenya at that time. Didn't really talk about being Black. That wasn't like something that we spoke about or like identified as. But for me and many other African immigrants or immigrants from Black migrants from other countries, when we arrive to the United States, uh, um, we are identified. The broader society identifies us as Black. We lose our individual identities and national identities connected to our countries of origin and ethnic background. So, for example, we're no longer perceived as Rwandans, Congolese, Ethiopian, Somalian, Eritrean, Jamaican, Haitian, Nicaraguan. We're simply Black in this country, and the society treats us that way. So the lived experience of Black immigrants is very much one that mirrors the experience of Black American citizens in this country. Once we're here, we also encounter anti-Black discrimination, racial prejudice because of our skin color. Similar to American-born Black individuals, we're often subject to the same risks of poverty, lack of access to quality healthcare and affordable housing. We're also facing a lot of over-policing and also increased incarceration. We find that many nonprofits specifically serving Black migrants in the US are not well funded. And the actualization of us taking up space is still something that we really have to work hard to do. And many Black migrants, Black refugees, African refugees, when we're being resettled, we're not aware of the history that this country has when it comes to its people of color, especially when it comes to to Black people. But this history is a huge part of how we're treated and how we're viewed in this country. So we have to do a lot of learning, and it takes a while. But unfortunately, the learning that we have to do doesn't come as quick compared to the treatment that we receive. So the moment that we get here, the treatment is right away applied towards us, but we might not have the knowledge, we might not have the experience. For example, a lot of African Americans would say when they're raising their Black sons, their Black children, they have to have the talk about how to treat themselves when they encounter the police or any other authority figure. We're not being told that in our many of our African migrant, Black migrant households. A lot of times that's something that we have to learn later in after being here for a while. So it's a lot of like learning and unlearning as well, because if you're getting the knowledge of the United States from media outside this country, obviously it's so different than the one that you get to have once you're living in this country. And then there's also the part of like the systemic discrimination for Black migrants, which has existed for so many years. So the history and our finding documents clearly have shown that anyone who is not considered as white was never meant to be a citizen of this country. For a long time, this has been what this country was founded on, and the assumption was quickly incorporated into the immigration system, where it's persisted and it's seen clearly until today. For example, it wasn't until 1967 that the term refugees applied to individuals that were not from Europe, the Western um, countries. So before that, the term refugee is mostly applied to individuals from Europe, and then I think it was around 1967 that it was changed, and it was no longer attached to geographic restrictions or entered into like laws and all that. But at the same time, just because this was like the 60s wasn't that long ago, and just because a law was changed and now refugees apply for to individuals all over the country, all over the world, it doesn't mean that the application is happening smoothly. So every year, there's always a lot of work being done on the ground to make sure that this is applied equally. But also, like, even on the border, like, there is studies showing that more than any other immigrant group, undocumented Black foreign-born individuals are caught in the deportation pipeline. So, for example, I think studies are showing that Black migrants at the border are accounting for a disproportionate number of criminal-based deportations. About 76% of Black migrants are deported on criminal grounds, compared to 45% of other immigrants. And this is despite Black migrants only making up 7% of the non-documented population in the US. So this is just another form of discrimination that we know and we're aware of being applied towards like Black migrants. There's an organization in Detroit called ABISA, which stands for African Bureau, I think, for Immigration and Social Affairs, and their campaign is rooted, and their mission is rooted around pretty much like raising funds to help Black migrants at the border who are facing deportation, and they're given like a fine to pay, but they're unable to pay. We found that other immigrant groups have much more stronger foundation when it comes to like having like a lawyers and like resources to help them with their cases, and not as much when it comes to like Black migrants. So if you're looking into an organization that's doing some of that work, particularly for Black migrant population, like ABISA is a great one for sure. And then, for example, even for me, my experience has been working on the ground specifically with refugees, and it's been encouraging to see like the past years the amount of resources has come around for refugees, but also it's been discouraging to see the resources that have been coming up in the efforts towards particular refugee groups. For example, people from Ukraine, people from Afghanistan, and not seeing as much being poured for individuals from Congo, for example, or the Tigrinyas from Ethiopia, who are also facing very similar crisis and in need of a lot of support and advocacy. And these are things that when you're an immigrant or a refugee from a Black country or an African country, you see there, it's right in front of you. And even me working with leaders in the community and like hearing that there were like resources and funds specifically for the Afghan population, or like population from the Ukraine, and like they're like, what about mental health support, for example, for people from Congo, or other Black, like Haiti. We saw what happened in Del Rio a couple years ago, when the they were being attacked at the border and treated like animals, basically, and put on a plane and were taken back to Haiti. And what's interesting is that all the Black people at that time that were on the border were just put in a plane and taken to Haiti. And you found like there were immigrants from Cameroon and many other African countries are also part of that. And it just shows like how we're just, you know, put in a box, taken away, and like expected to figure things out by ourselves. But you know, I would have loved to hear a lot of more support and outpouring and coming from our country to supporting Haitians. And I know that there's some like progresses that have happened since then, but there's still a lot that needs to be done. So I mean, despite all these challenges that I've shared, the United States continues to demonstrate strength in welcoming migrants and refugees, and also a lot of individuals, Black migrants from many countries, are still view this country as a beacon of hope for many, themselves and their loved ones. Many continue to believe in the words in the Statue of Liberty, you know, give me, you're tired, you're poor, you know, all those things, and we'll welcome you. So it's something, despite all these things that I shared and the challenges and discrimination, that many Black people still want to come to this country. So what is our role as individuals living in this country, being able to have to create a welcoming space for an equal like immigration process as well, and equal division of resources. So I mean, so I think I can talk more, but I want to make sure that I give space for people who might have questions or comments, and then I can come back to.
Sylvia, thank you so much for speaking about your experience, your personal experience, and your very, very you know, knowledgeable experience working with other refugees in an organizing role, with other organizations that you've worked with, and appreciate you bringing some numbers and things like that, some statistics, and as well to kind of give a even, you know, bigger, clearer picture to everyone. I do, there are now we're going to move to the question and answer kind of portion where we'll be able to sort of discuss more. So, you know, please continue to write your questions and submit them into the questions tab, please. So there's continued time. We can continue to do that. I have some questions, as some others might add some additional information or additional questions. But Sylvia, I had two questions, but I'll start with one. The first one focused on community sponsors and volunteers, you know, other community members who might be working with refugees in a, you know, supportive role and in a volunteer role. You had mentioned something like, you know, having the talk, right? Black African American families needing to have a talk, perhaps especially with sons, with young men as they're growing up, and potentially interacting with police officers, and unfortunately having to have those clear, level-headed discussions about the potential dangers of interacting with police officers. When we think of things like that, or other forms of discrimination that people may encounter, whether that's with employment or whether that's in a whole host of kind of interacting with your community, what can community sponsors, volunteers, people who are here to support refugees, what can they do? What can we do to support that process, to advocate for clients that we're working with, and to help educate them too, so that they are careful, for lack of a better term, or just aware of some of these issues that perhaps they hadn't thought of before, or had. What is that response? What are some ways that we can do that? What are our responsibilities to help really with sort of cultural orientation? I think of it as part of cultural orientation, becoming aware of those things. How do we do that in a sensitive way and in a way that is actually helpful to people?
Yeah.
Any ideas?
Thank you for your question, Derek. It's obviously there is like it's complex. The response is like not clear. I don't think I can have like a one way of doing it and it'll be perfect. But what came into my mind first is even before working with refugees and working with immigrants as a community sponsor or a community member, what are you doing to advocate systemically, to make sure that like when we arrive, the space is welcoming and we don't have to have the talk. You know, I'm dreaming of a time that that's not something that Black Americans have to think about doing, or like African immigrants have to learn to do once they get here. So what do we need to do in our systems, our government systems, our education system around us, to prepare a space that people don't feel that that hostility, that fear that they need to do that. So I think our votes matter, who we vote for, where we go, who we surround ourselves with, the kind of conversations we participate in, and the things that we choose to bring awareness on matter. So I think that's like the foundation, to be honest. And then like I always I always wonder like you know, like I feel like the you cannot say you love immigrants or Black migrants if you don't love your fellow African American brothers and sisters, or like Latino African American brothers and sisters, Hispanic American brothers and sisters. So I think that the way you choose to live in your community, and who you choose to be a part of and what you choose to be a part of, is really important, so that when we're coming in from all these other sides of the world, we it's not just maybe even you already are connected with an African American family or brother and sister, or Hispanic American family and brother and sister that you can bring with you if you're not from that background, to help with welcoming and showing diversity and inclusion, and just showing like the beauty of America in general. So I do think that's important. I think that there's a lot of work to be done within the resettlement agencies and like just the community sponsored partners, in terms of just like that welcoming, initial welcoming moment. We get our jobs, we get the training on how to apply for jobs, we get the apartment, we get the groceries, the furniture and everything. But I think like just learning about systems and the history of this country, especially if you're coming in and you're a person of color, it's important to incorporate that in the beginning stages, whether it's through conversations or or bringing in different experts to lead trainings or discussions. But I do think that a big part of not having to do that initially will be elevated if the foundation has been laid of like creating a welcoming space. And I think that like if you're not a person of color who might not be having the lived experience of a person of color in this country, like being intentional of bringing in other people from that, who have that experience. But also it's not just like reaching out to those people at that time to bring them, but it's more of like, how do you form a relationship with that person? So it's not just, I need you to come and talk about, I don't know, like living, as a Black person here or as an Asian or Hispanic, but more of like, no, we already established a strong relationship and foundation with this particular person, and now it's just natural that you're gonna, I sometimes I feel like people always are gonna reach out to these people when they need when they need something from particular groups of people. And I think that we missed out on an opportunity of actually having like a well-rounded, really very beautiful relationship with someone from a different background, that can lead into so much more, including like inviting them to help you with welcoming immigrants from a different background.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, absolutely agree. And yeah, I think you spoke beautifully about that. I'm going to go to some questions. I think someone was asking if you were meaning originally when you were speaking, you had some statistics and things like that on Black migrants. I don't know if I know you didn't have a PowerPoint or slide with that per se, but if there was any follow-up information, we could send that like as part of the email or something like that. If people were interested in learning more about the specific statistics or anything like that, if you have anything like that to share, that would.
Yeah, a lot of what I got it from like the Center of Migration Studies, and also the Census Bureau's of American Community survey. So I'm happy to share the links with you, Derek, and then you can forward it to people with the email.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Someone else asks, how can people who want to welcome newcomers educate themselves more about the Black migrant experience in a respectful and meaningful way? And I think you talked a little bit about that, but yeah.
I think relationship, to be honest, I think even for me, learning about different cultures and like being comfortable to ask some what we consider difficult questions or inappropriate questions even, come easily when I have a relationship with someone. So being intentional with who you're surrounding yourself with, and being okay being uncomfortable, because obviously if you're dealing with someone who's different from you or from a different background, you're gonna have to adjust. But I think you learn that we have a lot more in common than you would think we have, that separate us. The media or like, you know, society has tried to show that we're different, but we really aren't. A lot of us just are just wanting a safe space for our family. We want to like have good relationships and all that. So just being intentional and being just direct if you need to about like, I'm trying to build a relationship with you, or like, you know, it's and also like it being the other way around, like, you know, like it's not just you wanting something from them, but it's also like how can you be there for them and support them. But I think relationships is like one of the best ways.
Yeah, and like you pointed out, not, you know, having real relationships with people for all of the reasons, not just when you want something from someone, or not just because it's Black History Month or something like that, but that it really is, you know, something that's central to just the work that we're all trying to do all the time. And we can't be perfect and we can't do, you know, everything, but is it a real, is it intentional to really have that sort of fellowship and relationship with people?
Yeah, and I think like it's so interesting. I think that I think about my experience back in Kenya and how I was surrounded by a lot of people from all over the country, different countries in Africa, like Somalians, Ethiopians, Congolese, and we were all refugees, but we really didn't focus, like it wasn't about like, and even like Muslims and Christians, like different religions too, and like people even intermarried, like, you know, from like different religious background and different countries, because, you know, people are in refugee camps for like a lot of years before they're resettled, 20, 30, 17 for my family. So I feel like it's important to like respect someone's culture, someone's background, but don't let that get in the way of getting to know that person and building a relationship with that person, because at the end of the day, that is a human being just like you, who you know. So I do think that like it's important to respect someone's culture, someone's background, but also I always feel like there's a lot of like people having fear of not saying the right thing or like not coming off the right way, and that just kind of like encourages more othering, if anything, for me. So I feel like just being careful with like, I want to respect this person's culture and their background, and I try to do the same thing, but also at the same time, they're also human beings that are not perfect. I'm not perfect, um and and that's how learning and growth happens. And I think even like those authentic relationships, like no one is perfect, and I think um being able to just like be aware of that and go beyond that, I think yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for what you're saying. I appreciate that so much. Um, I think I just know for myself, and when I speak with sponsors and volunteers, when you speak on that issue of sort of being afraid to make mistakes, and of course that's a good thing. We appreciate that you don't want to offend someone and that you're trying hard not to do that. That's great. You're trying to be respectful of that person's culture. Wonderful. But also, like, real relationship comes from being willing to kind of make mistakes, to mispronounce things, and then just apologize and try to learn from it and show that. That's where I think real human
Yeah,
interaction comes from.
there's like the disrespect, there's like the people we're just choosing to be ignorant and choosing to not want to like even try. There are people who are like, superficial like that, and they're not even trying to get out of the way. But there are people who, like, even if, like, for me, my name, it's like, if you don't pronounce my last name well, like, and you're coming from a good place, and I can tell that you're coming from a good place, I most of the time I don't take it personal as much, because you're coming back. You're not like, you just didn't see me, and all of a sudden you're just saying all these things. Like, we're building a relationship. And um so I do think that, like, it's just to not promote other, because we're not really, like, we're human beings at the core. And I think one of the things why the reason why I'm saying this is because I think once you have that relationship with someone, then things become personal. So it's no longer, oh, the refugee issue or the immigrant issue. It's my friend's issue. That's my
Mm,
sister's issue. It's my child's issue. It's more. And I think once things become personal like that, then it's hard not to see the discrepancies. It's hard not to want to do something.
mm,
It's hard to just sit aside and watch. I think it's much more easier when you don't have a relationship with someone, to not fully be impacted. But I think it's more rewarding, if anything, having built that relationship. And it's more better for our society and our country in general, for creating a welcoming and inclusive place. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. Another question. Many co-sponsors and volunteers don't come from a very diverse background. They perhaps don't have that lived experience themselves. How can community engagement staff at local resettlement agencies encourage co-sponsors and volunteers to educate themselves, to do that work, for equitable and inclusive practices? How do we get people to work on their own stuff without having to lean on Black and brown people to educate?
Yeah, I don't. It's a hard question, I would say, because I feel like I have encountered a lot of people who mean well, like, but their actions are not, like, with a lot of volunteers who might not have experience dealing with or working with or having a relationship with uh, welcoming immigrants. I feel like there is a way that someone could cause more harm than help, even though it was coming from a good place. But I do think that, like, um, I feel like, just being honest, I feel like as a resettlement agency staff or volunteer coordinator or community engagement person, um, having those authentic, difficult conversations at the beginning is important, so that they don't have to like lean on that person of color or that immigrant for that for them to be the ones who answer or have the difficult conversation. So I think I would encourage more radicalness, I would say, to be honest, at the beginning stages when you're dealing with volunteers, because if they're coming to volunteer, they want to volunteer, like they came out of their way to do it, and I'm sure they want to do it the right way. So part of it is being willing to have those difficult conversations, and investing time in that, to be honest. And I'm thinking like, oh, like people might like might I don't know, like it might like cut out the pipeline, and less volunteers might not want to be able to, might not have the time or something. But I do think that it's important to have that those radical conversations and education, like uh, segments at the beginning with the volunteers before they deal with working with immigrants, welcoming immigrants, and having relationships. Yeah, that's my
Thank
answer.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think I agree, you know, and I think that there is a part to play. We certainly want to expose people to people with lived experience, so that they're speaking in their own voice, and but as also we don't want to rely on that it's sort of only their responsibility to teach us or to teach our volunteers about, you know, how to be culturally, you know, to practice cultural humility, or to you know, to understand the Black and African migrant experience. But certainly there's also a place for people who don't have that lived experience, who hopefully, especially as resettlement worker staff, have at least done some internal work to sort of break down our own biases, cultural biases, and some of our own, you know, people who don't, you know, are not people of color who have that lived experience, to do some internal, you know, for men perhaps to do some internal work about sexism and how that plays, how white people can take some ownership of the privilege that we experience in a white supremacist society, or, you know, history,
Yeah.
that you know, so we have a place to do that, to do our own work, and then share that perhaps with volunteers and sponsors, and encourage them to do that work too. We certainly have a part to play in that, I hope.
Yeah, and there's a huge resource within the immigrant and refugee population where people have written books, and are willing to come and be people to have those conversations or conduct the trainings, but they need to be compensated. So that's another thing. It's like there are people out there from an immigrant and refugee background who are comfortable doing the training or having the conversations and sharing their experiences, um, and are building careers from that, and are subject matter. So like being intentional in if no one from the team is comfortable or like well skilled, um, going in the community and inviting the leaders who are willing to do that, but also it's compensating them and showing and yeah, showing the value towards what they're bringing in. So I think it doesn't have to be like, you know, just find their interpreter or like the immigrant that just came or something, or like someone who's been living here for a while to come and share their experiences. You can find like expertise from an immigrant background, um, to bring to the table too.
Thank you, Sylvia. Yeah, absolutely. Um, couldn't agree more. And respecting people's time and effort and experience, and making sure that we are compensating that as well. Putting those resources towards this, because we believe it's an important goal and an important thing to share.
Yeah. Mhm.
I do have another question, if it's okay, about because I know some of the audience here is also, in addition to potential community sponsors and volunteers, that we have that community sponsorship staff. And I want to be real and honest about something that you kind of alluded to earlier too, is sometimes we see more interest from the community when it came to Ukrainian refugees or Ukrainian parolees, Afghans, but sometimes don't see the same energy and interest, like you said, for Haitians or for other, for Congolese or for other groups of people. And how do or I would just love to hear some of your thoughts. You certainly aren't, don't have the answers per se, but some of your thoughts on how agencies and community engagement staff can navigate some of these really difficult things. Of course, we want community sponsors and community members to be interested in refugee and migrant issues and to support them. But how, what kinds of ideas do you have for making sure that we are insisting on a system that is fair to all and doesn't just kind of play into their interest when it's European refugees as opposed to people from African descent?
Yeah, I think it's challenging because a big part of it is like systemic. I hear, oh, it's coming all the way from our like the federal government. Our hands are tied and everything. But I do think that there is a lot of like opportunity and responsibilities for caseworkers or like resettlement agency staff, the executive directors, the refugee the refugee state coordinator, like the staffs who are working within the nonprofits, within the agencies, whether it's government or not, to speak up when they're being given grants that are specifically attached to particular immigrant groups and not for every immigrant group or refugee group in this case, and the same way too for when volunteers are coming in and they're like, oh, I'm here to like volunteer for the Afghans. Like, well, that's great, but let me tell you about another opportunity that we have for you to also serve. So I do think that there is like a lot of power to either just like support whatever is being pushed, if it's pushed on you, or it's being, if the narrative that's just allowing things to happen the way they are, that you can push back on that, or you can allow that to happen. Because you can just be quiet and be like, this is my job, I'm just here to do my job, and don't make the decisions. My director told me this, or the grant that we got. I do think that it's having that balance of like, yeah, the fundings are needed. We already know that many resettlement agencies are underfunded and not having a lot of resources and workers, but at the same time having that balance of still being able to like push back and say, we also have, because we also have other groups that need support. And then like another thing that I've seen is like having flexibility. So like I know like some local agencies here have received funding towards like Afghan, like the Afghan like population specifically for mental health or other things. But like once those fundings arrive, like not finding a way to allocate those to other groups too, in a way that is okay, but finding those loopholes to be able to serve other populations with something that might have came in specifically for one group, I think is important. But it's not easy, honestly. I do think that as immigrants on the ground are seeing the inequalities, we're seeing it, but we are not in a position of power. We're given, a lot of times we just speak up about it. But if you're in a position of power, whether you are like the case manager, whether you're like the director, or you're working with the state or the federal like agency, it really is important to just speak up. Whether they will take it or they will take your feedback and do something with it, they might not do that. They might not do it, or they might. But at least you know that you brought it up, and just being aware too, like being aware when things are becoming more and more specific for one group, just being able to see that and pushing back on that. And that goes with like the volunteers. Sometimes like the volunteers know what the media says, so they're just like, the news is showing us this, so this is what seems like it's a huge need. But you as a worker, what the real situation is. So being able to educate the volunteers as well. Unfortunately, that also falls on you too, because of just how things are communicated out there.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Sylvia, for your thoughtful insight into that. Yeah, I agree. I hope that we are aware and that we are willing and able to talk about it honestly with our potential volunteers and sponsors, with other members of the community, if we have those connections with, Congress people and mayors and governors and presidents, that we're, using that voice in ways to advocate for all. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that. And with that, we are towards the end of the time that we have today. I just want to thank Sylvia for being here and presenting, and thank you to everyone for attending today's RWC Lunch and Learn. Everyone, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. If you want to share that with people, please do so. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Sylvia.
Yeah, thank you, Derek.
Appreciate it. Yeah, and for anyone still on, if you want to complete this survey, please do so. It's in the chat, or you can use your phone for that QR code. Just helps us understand a little bit more about, what sort of topics you might be interested in and how we're doing. So appreciate any time that you spend on doing that.